This is TLV1.
The Tel Aviv Review.
Hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review. I'm your host, Gilad Halpern. Every week we bring you conversations with writers about books and ideas and other things that we like. And if you like us, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter by going to our homepage, that's tlv1.fm/Tel Aviv Review. Scroll down to the bottom and click the big red button that says Patreon, click and support us. Some of you have been doing this for months and years, and we cannot thank you enough. This episode is part of a series in partnership with the Israel office of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation that was supposed to be called Israel Behind the Headlines. But the 7th of October events changed our plans, like everybody else's, and this episode is one of a few that will focus on the current crisis in a broader context. My guest today is an Israeli journalist, Amir Tibon. He is a diplomatic correspondent for Haaretz newspaper, formerly its Washington, D.C. correspondent between 2017 and 2020. Amir is also a survivor of the 7th of October massacre. As a resident of Kibbutz Nahal Oz, on that Shabbat morning, he spent long, terrifying hours in the safe room of his house, together with his wife and young daughters, until his father, a retired general, showed up at the door and saved them. Amir Tibon, hello and welcome back to the Tel Aviv Review.
Hi, thank you for having me on the show.
So almost a decade ago, you made Nahal Oz, a kibbutz located less than a mile from Gaza, your home. It is where your daughters were born and have been raised. Do you regret that decision in retrospect?
No, I don't regret the choice to go and live in Nahal Oz, a choice that my wife and I made immediately after the war of 2014, what was called at the time Operation Protective Edge. When that was going on, we still lived in Tel Aviv, and I was working as a journalist, and I traveled a lot during the war to the border area and visited Nahal Oz and other kibbutzim on the border. And by the time the war was over, September of 2014, we made a decision, we were a young couple then with no children, to go and support one of those communities, to move to the border area. We chose Nahal Oz. It's the closest place in Israel to Gaza, and was at the time officially the most bombarded community in Israel. But when you come and visit the place and you see it with your own eyes, that's a surprise to many people. You see a beautiful, green, colorful place with incredible people and a very resilient community. And so it was a choice. And despite everything that happened on October 7, not a choice that I regret in any way. But of course, what happened was shocking and tragic.
Yeah, so tell us what happened on that Shabbat morning. How was it possible that your father, a 62-year-old retired general living in Tel Aviv, was the one who saved you?
Well, it's important to understand what happened on October 7, not just through the prism of our personal story, but on a wider lens. What happened was a complete breakdown of the military along the border, the military bases that are supposed to be the first responders and defend the civilian communities. They themselves were attacked and taken over by Hamas, and we lost hundreds of soldiers on that day in battles along the border, and at the same time swarmed the civilian communities like my kibbutz Nahal Oz, where 14 people were killed and murdered, and where 7 people got kidnapped into Gaza. And this breakdown of the military led to a situation in which very, very small groups of fighters, it was police officers, soldiers from the special units who ran to the front, and many times civilians who also took weapons and whatever they had and just decided to go and save lives. They were the first ones to engage these terrorists and kill them and save people. In our own story, my parents drove from Tel Aviv. My father just took a pistol with him. They approached our kibbutz. One soldier that they met along the way joined him. They joined a firefight in which several soldiers from Maglan, which is a special forces unit, were engaging a group of terrorists on the road to the kibbutz. And eventually he was able to make it. But it's part of a larger story that day of a collapse of the system and initiatives by soldiers and police officers and citizens who decided to do whatever they could in this situation to deal with it, basically.
This collapse is not something that you took into account in 2014 when you decided to make Nahal Oz your kibbutz, your home.
No, not at all. I have to say we had complete faith in the military. And if you don't have complete faith in the military, you can't live in a place like Nahal Oz. I mean, we would go to bed every night less than a mile from Gaza City, from the easternmost neighborhood of Gaza City, the Sajaiya neighborhood, where there are very difficult battles right now between the military and Hamas. And if we thought that the border was so easy to penetrate, we wouldn't have lived there, and neither would anybody else. Nahal Oz was founded in 1953 as a border community. It was a direct decision of David Ben-Gurion at the time as the prime minister, that along the border with Gaza, there needs to be one community that will be specifically closer to Gaza City and to the border than all the others. And that is the story of Nahal Oz. And all these years, the kibbutz experienced different levels of danger and crisis and tragedy. But there was never a situation in the 70 years the kibbutz has existed in which terrorists came into the community and murdered people like this. That was something that had never happened before. And we did not believe it was possible until October 7. We believed the military was protecting the border. And we were told by the military and the government and the prime minister that there was an underground wall that made it impossible to use tunnels to get into communities like ours.
Because the scenario had been discussed before with regard to underground tunnels.
Yeah, the tunnels were a huge concern, and we were told that the underground wall had saved us from that danger. And there was this supposedly smart fence with all kind of electronic and intelligence equipment that was also supposed to save us. And there were soldiers in the different bases along the border. So we felt very confident that in any case of an attempt by Hamas to penetrate the border and reach our community, there were several layers of protection that would save us. And it turned out that all of them collapsed on October 7th.
I mean, you work for a newspaper that has warned repeatedly about the short-sightedness of Netanyahu's Gaza policy and Palestinian policy in general. So putting the tactical military issues aside, as you said, you put complete faith in the army up until the 7th of October. The broader diplomatic, political situation was ominous all along. I mean, in your newspaper, you could read day in, day out about how Gaza would blow up in our faces at some point. Was it not something that affected your quality of life down there?
When we warned about the possibility of a war with Gaza, and that the deteriorating situation there would lead to some sort of an explosion, and that it was short-sighted of the Netanyahu government to pump all that money into the hands of Hamas via these payments from Qatar, what we imagined was another round of fighting in which thousands of rockets would be launched toward Israel. We did not expect what they did on October 7th. And so even the people who warned of a terrible war with Gaza, which we all knew would arrive at some point, didn't think the war would look like this. So that's something that has to be said. While we did warn of an impending disaster, we didn't realize how large of a disaster it was going to be.
So tell us, what have you been doing since you were saved on that day, in the afternoon of that Shabbat, by your father? What's happened to your family and to the kibbutz in general? Where are you staying?
So we all left the kibbutz on that Saturday night, around 11 p.m. or midnight. The first bus left the kibbutz with the residents on it. And we were evacuated to a community near Haifa, Kibbutz Nahal Oz, which has been hosting us with incredible generosity ever since the early morning hours of October 8th. When the first bus of Nahal Oz residents, our community is about 450 people. When the first bus of Nahal Oz residents arrived in Mishmar Emek, the local community was already waiting for people with towels and clean sheets and blankets and toothbrushes and soaps, because we couldn't take anything with us, not even clothes. We just had to leave in a hurry. And they took care of all our needs. They opened a kindergarten here for our children, and they've been hosting us ever since. And they passed a decision inside their kibbutz that they're willing to host us for 1 year over here. 1 year. And this is not easy, okay? To open your home to more than 300 evacuees from a different community who come here with their children and with their own issues and problems. And many people are traumatized and going through a difficult phase. As I said, we lost 14 people on that day. Think about it. A community of less than 500 people loses 14. And we still have 2 people who are kidnapped in the hands of Hamas over there. And I salute them for hosting us like this and opening their door and opening their heart to us.
Will you be able to go back? Do you want to?
Most people in the community want to return to Nahal Oz. I visited the kibbutz once since October 7. I went in to bring some things from home, and it was a very exciting moment, and I felt suddenly my great connection and how much I miss that place. But going back will require some big changes. First of all, on the security front, we want to see that the military succeeds in its war in Gaza and removes the possibility of Hamas ever committing something like October 7 again. We also want to see a change in the priorities of the country. For many years, southern Israel and the Gaza border area were not treated as a first priority area by the Netanyahu governments. It's much easier to find a specialist in any medical field in other parts of Israel. If you have children that need any kind of special help, whether it's a medical or psychological or children with special needs, then the priorities you're going to find in the Gaza border area are not as good as you will find in other parts of Israel. These things have to change. If the government wants people to go back to these communities and rebuild them and strengthen them, the government is going to have to start treating this area as a priority area. So far, it hasn't done so. And the last thing I want to say, there is a question of trust. Right now, we don't trust the leadership of this country. The leadership of this country failed us miserably on October 7, and frankly has been failing us since October 7. Their approach hasn't changed. If you look at the budget that they're trying to pass these days, they are prioritizing sectarian needs and corrupt government ministries that nobody knows what they're doing over the needs of our soldiers and of the evacuated communities from the south and the north. Because let's remember, Gilad, we also have new neighbors here.
Yeah.
That we meet every day from Kiryat Shmona and Metula.
From the Lebanese border area.
Yeah, the tens of thousands that they also have been evacuated and have no idea when they will be able to go back home. And when you see what a price the citizens of this country are paying right now, and we hear every day about the soldiers who are falling in Gaza. I have a brother who's serving on the southern front. My next door neighbor is serving on the northern front. You see the sacrifice that so many families are making. And then you see these corrupt ministers just taking all the money to themselves and to their made-up, fictitious ministries. You realize that with this bunch of clowns, we're not going anywhere. And it's going to be very, very difficult to complete the mission of rebuilding the Gaza border communities as long as this bunch of fools has the power in their hands.
So if I understand you correctly, what you're saying is that you are more inclined to put faith in the military, to rebuild your trust in the military, than in the... it will take much more effort and much longer to do it vis-a-vis No?
No, we're not letting anybody off the hook, Gilad. We are also very disappointed with the military over October 7. And this entire discourse that Netanyahu and his professional liars on social media and on television are trying to create, that it's either Netanyahu's fault or the military's fault. I'm sorry, but that's a false choice. He failed and the generals failed. It's not one or the other. They failed together. And by the way, one of the things I'm most angry about with these current batch of generals leading the military is that they did not speak up loud enough and clear enough about the dangers posed to Israel by this government. And they also, I think, have to go. Maybe they can continue until the first phase of the war is over. But they also have to go. The head of intelligence, the head of the Southern Command, the chief of staff of the military, they all failed. And we expect them to resign just as we expect the prime minister to resign. No question about it. But I do think that right now in Gaza, the military is doing a good job. Something that cannot be said about how the government is treating the internal crisis that we have inside the country.
Yeah. Well, this is exactly what I want to ask you about. Also, as a diplomatic correspondent, the military is doing a good job in Gaza. What people in the West are seeing is something completely different. It's seeing immense destruction, unprecedented killing. I want to ask you, how do you explain this really permissive carte blanche that the Israeli government, the current Israeli government, despite all its flaws that Western governments know as well as you do, this permissive carte blanche that they've received to pursue the military campaign almost without any backstops?
The Israeli public still lives on October 7. That's the most important thing to understand. The Israeli public still lives on October 7. We still feel like we woke up and saw these white SUVs with Hamas terrorists in the streets of Sderot, that are just a town on the Gaza border, shooting to death innocent civilians. And everything the military is doing from our perspective is still a response to the horrors of that day. And those horrors are still being discovered. And we're still learning new details about just how bad it was, this Hamas attack, and how they abused people and raped women and did unthinkable atrocities. I understand that the world is also seeing the images from Gaza, and those are very, very disturbing images and tragic. And I'm personally not numb to it. I am sad about it. I would have preferred that things could look different, but I don't feel Israel had a choice this time. I've been critical over past wars and military operations, but this time I feel like it's an inevitable fight that we did not choose.
What do you think, also from a diplomatic perspective, would be the day after? What Israel should do, what the regional powers should do, what global powers should do?
The discussion of the day after is a farce, and I would prefer if President Biden stopped dealing with it. As long as Benjamin Netanyahu and Mahmoud Abbas, Abu Mazen, are leading Israel and the Palestinian Authority, nothing good will come out of this place. And the whole debate about it is only being used by these two stooges for political purposes. Biden and the international community should leave it, I believe, to the Israelis and the Palestinians to deal with this headache. And if these two peoples cannot choose normal leaders, then there's nothing that can be done about it. Right now, what Biden is doing with talking about a two-state solution and the Palestinian Authority in Gaza, Abbas is using it to fortify his hold on power in Ramallah. Netanyahu is using it to fortify his hold on power in Jerusalem, and nothing will actually come out of it. With such corrupt and useless so-called leaders, you just can't do anything. And it's theater, it's make-believe to think otherwise.
So going back to what you said earlier, this trust that needs to be rebuilt between the Israeli state and the residents of the Gaza envelope communities, given what you're saying now about the political landscape, it's pretty hard to be to imagine.
Not with this current leadership, let's put it that way. I don't see it happening.
Mm-hmm. Also, I want to ask you about, you were a correspondent in DC for a long time. You followed the Israel-Palestine debate in America very closely, reported on it pervasively. Many people were surprised by this anti-Israel backlash on campuses and elsewhere in really pervasive especially progressive.
Anti-Semitic to a great degree.
And anti-Semitic to a great degree, absolutely. Were you surprised as well, or did you see the signs of it already then 5-6 years ago when you were working there?
No. I wasn't surprised. I always thought that there was a suicidal element on the American left, which helped elect Trump in 2016. Tried to help him get reelected in 2020, but luckily failed. And we have the great friend of Israel and the great leader, Joe Biden, now in office. And he's trying to help Trump win again in 2024. It's a suicidal element, mostly of young, uneducated, even if they have higher education, but uneducated people who believe in all kinds of fantasies and think that they live in a movie and are just trying to destroy the world with their dumb and unfounded reading of American politics and global politics. And part of it is also conspiratorial anti-Semitism, of course. I mean, it's definitely part of the story. But no, I was not surprised. And I think...
not even by the scale of it?
I don't think I was surprised by the scale of it. I think it's it's the same people who were doing it before. Now they maybe are getting more attention. Listen, I think Israeli politicians need to ask themselves one question every day when they wake up in the morning. And the question goes like this. Are my actions and words today helping President Biden continue his support of Israel? Or are my actions and words today helping the far left and sometimes anti-Semitic elements in the US criticize President Biden for that support? This is the question we have to ask ourselves every day. Are we helping Biden continue supporting Israel and its just war against Hamas? Or are we helping his critics in the far left attack him for supporting
Israel? And the subtext of what you're saying is that they're not asking themselves that question.
Of course not. Of course not. On most days, they are helping the anti-Semites. When a minister from the government says we need to drop a nuclear bomb on Gaza, and a different minister from the government says that we need to transfer the Palestinian population out of Gaza, and a third one says we'll fight with Soviet weapons if America dares to tell us to stop, they're helping the anti-Semites. And this is a big part of the problem. Again, we have a government of clowns.
What do you think it would have looked like if Trump was still in office? I mean, there is a possibility that this 7th of October attack would have happened 4 or 5 years ago.
I think it's not a coincidence that it happened now. I think the Hamas and the Hezbollah in Iran, they saw how weak this government was. They saw how weak Israeli society was because of the last 10 months and the big fight over the government's attempt to dismantle the judiciary. And they decided to strike now because of these two factors. I think they miscalculated when it came to Biden. They didn't anticipate how strong his support for Israel would be. And I think if it was Trump instead of Biden, we wouldn't have seen the same international support that Israel received also outside the US for the first 2 weeks of the war. And he played a very important role in that.
And that is crucial for Israel's success in this campaign.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. Amir Tibon, thank you very much for joining us today, and I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you. And also many thanks to Itai Shelem, the manager of TLV1 Studios, and to the Konrad Adenauer Foundation for their generous support. And now we've got a request. Many or most of you listen to us on the Apple Podcasts app, and we would like to ask you to please consider writing us a review. You too can support us by going to our website and subscribing onto our Patreon campaign. Check out our archive. It has probably close to 1,000 interviews by now. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and most important, join us again next week for another edition of the Tel Aviv Review. And until then, from me here in Tel Aviv, goodbye.